Okay. Welcome to the Oversight. Oh, are you ready? Okay. Welcome everybody to the Oversight Committee meeting of August 12th, 2021. The only item on the agenda today is the continued discussion of boards, commissions, and committees. Just to give everybody a little background, this committee began its review of boards and commissions on October 10th, 2019, and continued discussion on March 12th, 2020. Because of the pandemic and focus of the city on essential services, subcommittees of the council did not meet on a regular basis. We revisited this topic 9 months later, and then again on April 8th, 2021. The makeup of the council has changed considerably since we first began, with only Councilmember Holman, Mayor Clark, and myself participating in this discussion from the very beginning. So, Ms. Walker, I'm counting on you to bring us up to date today. And glad to have Councilmember Schuler and Councilmember Studley with us today. Mayor Clark had just let me know that she has a conflict and won't be able to join us for the meeting today.
Councilmember Holman did text me a few minutes ago and said he is coming, he's just running late.
Okay, great.
So you should have in your hands this lovely spreadsheet. This shows all of the committees we have, what their functions are, how they were established, whether they require expertise, how many members, how often they meet, etc. And you'll see we have 36 boards and commissions on this list. So it's quite lengthy. And so for each of those commissions, because we've adopted an ordinance and a resolution saying all of our boards, commissions, and committees are going to follow the Open Meeting Act regardless of whether it would be required by
etc.
law.
And you'll see we have 36
All of these require
boards and
posting,
commissions on this
staffing
list. So
minutes, all the
quite
good
lengthy,
stuff
and so
that-
for each of those
that,
commissions,
we have
because we've
on council
adopted an
committees.
ordinance and a resolution,
So it ends up,
all of our boards, commissions, and committees are
utilize
going to
the
follow
staff
the
time
Open Meeting
to,
Act regardless of whether it's
etc.
And you'll see we have 36
lots of committees
required
and lots
boards
of
and commissions.
functions. And so as we've talked about this over the
Quite
last
lengthy.
2
And so for
years,
each of those
really,
commissions, you can see
council has tried to figure out how best to consolidate some committees to maybe reduce that number somewhat, whether or not we needed all of the committees, those kind of things. And we also saw through this process that the committees aren't all consistent with one another in terms of terms of office, how long the term is, term limits, how appointments are made. Do you have to live in Norman or not? Can you only be on one committee or not? It's just sort of all over the place because some of them are created by ordinance, some by resolution. So we have some ad hoc committees, maybe one ad hoc committee, I should be more specific, that has continued to live on past the ad hoc task. And so that's one that we talked about refining to make the duties match really what they're doing. So we've discussed this and struggled with this issue 4 times over the last couple of years, and we're back again. So last time in April when we met, we talked about several different proposals that have been previously discussed and what that would look like. So the first proposal was a consolidation, so consolidating the Greenbelt Commission and Planning Commission and making the Planning Commission appointments ward specific. This would require an amendment to the code and to the charter because Planning Commission is one of those few boards that is set out in the charter itself, and that's where the appointment language is. So we would want to amend the charter conveniently. That's coming up, so that can be done. And we would try and pull some of those duties of the Greenbelt Commission into the Planning Commission to make sure that those needs were still being addressed, those voices were still being heard. So the proposal was to amend for the membership and then add language that says 2 of the appointments will be appointed based upon their interests or expertise regarding open space preservation, because that's a big focus of the Greenbelt Commission. Mm-hmm. And if that were to pass, we would then eliminate the Greenbelt Commission and those duties would be pulled to the Planning Commission. Proposal 2 was another consolidation. Consolidate the Tree Board, Bicycle Advisory Committee, and the Parks Board. And these are 3 different committees. Tree Board set up by code, Bicycle Advisory Board's resolution. This is a great example of all the kinds of sources of these things. And the Board of Park Commissioners is set by charter. So the changes would require, again, another charter change. And it would require that 2 appointments to the Board of Park Commissioners be selected based on their interest or expertise regarding urban forestry, and 2 selected based on their interest in cycling, including residents from cycling and transportation groups, health promotion organizations, OU, Norman schools, or local businesses which support bicycle use, and other interested citizens. And again, that's just trying to ensure that those voices continue to be heard. They're just heard in one meeting instead of 3 separate meetings. Proposal 3, this is the ad hoc committee that started out as a oversight of the construction of the animal shelter and pet adoption facility, probably, 15 years ago?
More than that, but
Maybe more than
about
that, yeah.
eight, almost 20. It would have been in 2002.
Yeah, so that they continue to meet. That was set up by resolution because it was ad hoc, so it didn't need to be codified, but we really need to rescind that resolution and codify that committee. I mean, the discussion there centered around how do we make the committee members, how do we change the makeup of that committee to require some rural representation. So we talked about other duties for them. I know at our last meeting, Brenda and I watched that meeting again. They talked about facilitating social media updates for, Heartworm Month or whatever, using the committee to help facilitate those kind of things. And so that's something we need to continue to explore and expand. Proposal 4, this will be taken care of in our recodification of the entire code, which is ongoing. They are finalizing the final draft for review right now. And that's a process that we have not done in a long time. And so that is going to require a ton of code changes just in terms of getting rid of obsolete provisions, renumbering things, reorganizing it so it makes sense. This company, MuniCode, has gone through and found internal inconsistencies, and we knew a lot of those existed. Just over the years, people have, certain sections of the code have been amended without regard to another section of the code in a different chapter. And so you have some issues that have to be fixed. So that process is going on, and in that process, we have directed them to repeal the Children's Rights Coordinating Commission. That commission has not met in 4 or 5 years, at least.
Something like that.
And so that was a clear direction from council, and this was an opportunity to do it because it was just one of those obsolete provisions that could be addressed easily in that process. And the reason I mention that process is because we are trying to avoid huge ordinance changes while that process is ongoing, because it will require us to renumber everything we do once it's finalized. So, Proposal 5, increase committee membership on the Board of Adjustment. Currently, they have 5 committee members and a specific provision that requires 3 members of the board to vote for anything to be approved. So when you don't have more than 3 show up sometimes, that can be challenging. You have to have a unanimous vote. And so the change here was to increase that board membership to 7. And then the concurring vote would go up from 3 to 4. Proposal 6, increase committee membership on the Norman Election Commission. This is a 5-member committee. This is one of the areas of inconsistency where we have some 5-member committees, some 7, some 9. And so this is where council is trying to make this a little more consistent and at least get us to 7 and 9-member committees. So the Norman Election Commission would increase from 5 to 7 members. Then we consolidated a few and we added 5 more. 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
I will just say Catherine is being way too kind, but the number of committees is very problematic with staff. I mean, you have the same staff supporting most of these boards and commissions, and just being able to keep up with it, doing good staff work and doing good research work and prep work becomes more difficult the more we have.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Both in terms of getting minutes done, but also just preparing for presentations and making sure we get you quality information. So that's something that we struggle with. So with these new committees, These were proposed. There seemed to be some consensus on the committee to move forward with those. This would be a Senior Issues Committee, Youth Advisory Committee, Transportation Committee, Budget Committee, and Core Norm and Development Committee. Those would each need to be codified. We'd want to outline the duties, the frequency of the meetings, determine whether we want the representation to be based on interest in a particular subject, where they live, specific qualifications, and then we need to work with the city manager to identify who would be charged with staffing those committees. And we've since received a request for another committee, which I think Brenda handed out, or maybe Randy handed out, from the Human Rights Commission that we can talk about in just a minute. But back in April, the 8th proposal we looked at was to change every committee appointment that's codified in Chapter 4 to 3-year terms and a 3-year term limit. We're really looking for that consistency there. This would be a really large amendment because some of the boards, well, all of the boards, set that out separately in each specific section of the code for that board. So this will be a thick packet, is what I'm warning you. And then we have to figure out how to word that in a way that we're addressing current appointments. I know the mayor has worked really hard since becoming mayor to try and enforce, just in her own appointment process, term limits of some kind, so we get turnover, get more citizen input, things like that. We do run into situations where you either can't find someone, or it's a committee where you really need that expertise. The one that comes to mind is the Housing Authority. They have had very long-standing committee members because they're experts now at this point. I mean, 20 years on this committee. And so that's one, I think, where she struggled with. You don't want to just kick off all the expertise either, you know.
And it's my understanding, talking with Karen Canavan, they spend about $8,000 on each board member doing training to get them up to speed on everything they need to know, I guess, related to HUD. So that was another conversation that Bria had with, or that Mayor Clark had with her, that led her to kind of say, okay, I get it. You know, maybe we need to let these remain that are there.
So the committee discussed the need to, yes, we want more turnover, more input, more opportunities for people to serve, but at the same time, we need some flexibility for things like the Housing Authority or areas where you just don't get applicants and you need that qualification. So that's the summary up to date of what the committee has discussed. And I don't know, Cynthia, if you want to talk about the letter from the Human Rights Commission. They've asked that council consider creating a new committee called the People of Color Affairs Commission.
Yes, thank you. Well, I know you just recently received this, but if you need a few minutes to read over it, I think it would make sense just to make sure that what we discuss that we're all aware of. So I'll just give you a couple minutes, and if you nod your heads, then I know that you've read it.
I'd actually like to read it into the record because
Oh,
we
perfect.
just, I mean, no one's seen it.
Oh,
So,
I know, right? So I didn't
Yeah.
want to discuss without
yeah.
allowing that
And it's,
time.
I know that, I attended the Human Rights Commission, meeting on Monday night, and I know that there was, a draft that was presented to the commission. The chair of the commission, Christina Owens, is here with us today. And so I know that they spent quite a bit of time, trying to, really express, the consensus feelings of the committee. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Okay, so it really won't take that long. First, I would like to take this moment, and this is from the chair of the Human Rights Commission, Christina Owens. First, I would like to take this moment to express my excitement to work with you all in a new capacity as chair of the Human Rights Commission. On behalf of the Human Rights Commission, I would like to introduce you to our newest recommendation, Norman's People of Color Affairs Commission. We are facing an alarming rise in disparities and equity across the board for our most vulnerable residents, people of color. The spectrum of equity disparities is wide. Data from the United States Census Bureau has shown these growing disparities amongst racial minority groups in the areas of education, unemployment, income, debt, COVID-19 fatalities, healthcare, life expectancy, affordable housing, homelessness, food insecurity, and mental health. This spectrum of acute needs cannot be facilitated by the HRC alone. We currently meet 6 times a year, with meetings typically lasting about 2 hours. The HRC cannot address these needs in 12 hours annually. Currently, our duties include receiving complaints of discrimination and retaliation in violation of Chapter 7. Our focus is on human rights for all persons regardless of their race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, age, place of birth, disability, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, familial status or marital status, including marriage to a person of the same sex. The POC Affairs Commission would focus on improving equity for marginalized people through institutional change, thus creating equity for all persons regardless of their race, color, ancestry, national origins, and place of birth. The City of Norman lacks a direct, dedicated, and continuous line of communication with POC communities. We need City of Norman platforms on which POC can collaborate and elevate one another into positions of leadership. The POC Affairs Commission would have a mission of advancing racial, color, and ethnic equity by identifying underserved communities in the City of Norman, and develop policies designed to advance equity for those communities, identifying, serving, and supporting the equity, accessibility, and social justice needs of Norman's people of color community, coordinating efforts to embed equity principles, policies, and approaches across the municipal government, addressing pressing issues and promote unity, cooperation, historical and cultural preservation and development, evaluating opportunities to increase coordination, communication, and engagement with community-based organizations and civil rights organizations, recognizing the contributions of people of color. Key elements of the commission would be, the commission will be advisory to the council on all issues pertaining to racial diversity and equity, up to 21 members to allow a large and diverse membership to maximally represent these communities, ethnically and culturally diverse membership, which includes but is not limited to Indigenous people, African Americans, Asian American and Pacific Islanders, Hispanic, and immigrants. The ability to create subcommittees is needed. This is our opportunity to turn our words of support into measurable action. We recommend with great urgency the creation of the Norman POC Affairs Commission. Thank you for your time and consideration. So I'm going to let you all let that just digest for a little, and anything that you'd like to add would
Yeah.
be great at this time, and then I hope to just kind of work through all of these things. So,
Thank you. Well, I'll just keep it brief to allow for you all to formulate the questions that you want to discuss, but I'll just share that the Human Rights Commission, this was brought forth earlier this summer, so there have been various versions of what has come to be this final letter, and so I think we finally had our first true collaborative as a whole HRC committee discussion at this last special meeting where this was put together. So that's where we are. This is what we landed with, and I'll first, allow for any of your questions.
anyone have any questions right now? Because how I would like to proceed today, because this agenda item was really to address the work of the last 2 years, and we wanted to add this recommendation from the Human Rights Commission since this was our agenda topic today, but I want to make sure that we work through this entire document, really. So if you have questions for Ms. Allen right now, this would be good.
I don't know that they're for Miss Allen. It's just kind of as everything as a whole, just
Okay.
as Catherine was presenting. So my questions: how many other committees are kind of normal in other cities that are comparable to our size?
It actually varies, and I don't know why I didn't bring that with me. I've done some fact gathering on and off for the last several years, and it varies depending on the size of the city, but even in Oklahoma City, everyone that in the whole state area that I've actually got data from have less than we do. The larger the city, the more you have, obviously, because the needs are different. But I think, if I recall correctly, they had about 20-ish in Oklahoma City. And that includes things like their airport authority. They have a lot of separate authorities for those big things, kind of like our utilities authority. And they also have a utilities commission. And so, for the most part, and when I polled all of these cities, oddly enough, none of them had council subcommittees. Nor did they ever, they rarely met in study sessions. So, it's just a lot
What do
different.
they do? They just show up and vote or what?
How do they?
Well,
They
I'm
do
cer-
have most of them do have pre-meetings where they kind of get questions answered, and they do have study sessions. I don't mean to say they never do. They do when they have a need for one, or something big that they're working on is going to take time or things like that. But just like having them every other Tuesday like we do, no.
May I add, Brenda, just to clarify the point that you just made, that larger cities have larger needs, and so maybe why they have more. I think that's a point. But the flip side is kind of touching on the comment Catherine made earlier, that then they also probably, since they're a larger city, have more capacity with staff, so then they can facilitate, the additional committees. So it's not just about larger city, larger needs, but also larger city, larger staff capacity.
Would you say that they are probably better combined than we are, as far as, I don't know, is it more like they'll define a committee, but then maybe they have more subgroups within those committees where we just have a slew of committees? Is that kind
That's
of?
probably a pretty fair statement. Like
Okay.
they cover a broader range of topics or
Right, like how we're
issues.
wanting to combine some of these.
Right. No, that's
Okay.
a pretty fair statement.
And then currently, who does all of the prep work right now for the minutes and the research and getting everything
It
together?
varies by board and committee. My office has all but one of the council subcommittees and, of course, all of the council meetings and study sessions and conferences. The planning staff, they provide staff support for Board of Adjustment, Board of Appeals, Greenbelt, Planning Commission. So they have 4 or 5. Utilities has Environmental Control Board. I think they just have the one. But it just kind of varies. But most of the staff that are tied to most of these are either in planning, public works, city attorney, or my office. So they're pretty much tied to almost all of them.
And they do their own minutes, their own research, prep work, all of that stuff, and then they turn it into you when it's done?
Oh,
to-
no.
No?
No, the staff does the minutes and the research on behalf of the committees, or the boards or commissions. And then, yes, at the end, when they approve their minutes, those minutes get filed in my office, but not all of their entire packets. But
Okay. And then, you guys had talked about how the housing authority has a lot of special training and they are specialized. I understand that there are specialties that are in that group, but I also understand the need for some fresh eyes, because what was good 20 years ago may not be good now. And even though I'm sure that they do constant training, sometimes it's nice to have a fresh face. So are we saying with the housing authority that we're not going to change anyone on there? Or can we possibly have a few positions where those can rotate out, but the ones who are specifically experts in that field would be able to stay, and then there's some committee members that could be rotated out?
we would probably need to pull, a lot of that was established under law, either state or whatever, but what requirements you had to have for that board. Now, whether or not you could add additional members, that could be possible. I mean, we'll probably have to do some research on that. But it doesn't mean that they never rotate off. It just means that sometimes, if you have one that's new and then bring it on, they just have 5 members, and one of them is required to be a resident. Unfortunately, she recently passed away this past week, so we will be replacing.
Okay.
And that resident is a resident of
Section 8.
their Section 8 community, so.
Okay.
But as far as how it can be, the makeup of it, I don't know, we probably need to do a little bit of research on that. It's kind of a specialty one, like COMCD, and they were established by a different framework.
Yeah. I would definitely say for that one, I would personally like to see some research into that if we can add someone, just because I know we are struggling as a city right now to find adequate housing for not just homeless people, but low income people. And, you know, if they have to leave one apartment, sometimes it's difficult to find another one to get into in a timely manner, and then they face homelessness. So if you could get me some information on that, I would really appreciate it. And I really am excited about this, and I know it's one more thing to add to it, but hey, this one's long overdue, and I appreciate all the work that you guys have done, and so thank you. That's all I have.
So also just want to point out that the Norman Housing Authority is the entity that's responsible for adding housing, even though it's limited because of resources and all kinds of other things. We are adding affordable housing units every single year for, gosh, I don't know how many years, and have a pretty dedicated funding source to allow that to happen. So they are fighting the good fight for sure.
Oh, I'm sure they are. I imagine they are pretty
So,
inundated.
You know, in light of some of the questions that you had, you know, and as long as we're going to look into this, it might be worth, because we are really trying to standardize number of members on a committee
Right.
within a range that's appropriate for whatever that committee is. You know, it might be time to add a member or two to allow for you know, supporting the expertise that and the continuity that is really needed on this committee, but also allowing for, you know, other people to
Fresh
take a
eyes.
fresh look. So
Yeah.
that might be worth looking into too. The example I always like to use in this discussion is the Historic District Commission is really probably one of the most defined commissions that we have as far as the membership of the committee. There have to be certain technical and professional occupations represented. You also have to have a certain percentage of people who actually live in a historic district represented on the board. So that, you know, really the origin of all of this was to just take a look, regardless of topic, of trying to find consistency about what the requirements are for serving on all these boards of commission, and boards and commissions. Term limits are present on a lot, but not all, you know, number of members, that kind of thing. So we've made a lot of progress, and to the point of staffing, I think that was another thing that was really being considered by the council at the time, which was, you know, 2 years ago now. And one of the ways to put this in perspective is we have peer and benchmark communities that we compare ourselves to. And I think it's safe to say, unless something's changed dramatically, that for a city of our size, we are generally understaffed for the work that we do and the size of a community that we are. And so I think council is very aware that all of this requires staff support. And so I think that was one of the original goals too, was, okay, how can we best make use of getting our work done and having everything represented, but also being respectful of the time that city staff contributes to supporting all of this, because without them, we would not be able to do this work. So I think that's part of it too. So what I'd like to do is just quickly review this April 6th document that Ms. Walker just went through, because you know, we want to ask questions along the way, but I've actually you know, steadily changed my thinking as we've gone along. So the first one about consolidating the Greenbelt Commission and the Planning Commission, I actually am going to recommend that we do keep the Greenbelt Commission intact. And the reason for that is for several things. I know that we talked a lot about, well, we could just incorporate several members of the Planning Commission having an expertise in that particular area. But when you really think about the work of the Planning Commission, and one of the things that we absolutely, I think, have full support for is having a Planning Commission made up of 9 members, and that each ward is represented by someone on the Planning Commission. That would make, I mean, to me, that's just a really positive improvement for all kinds of reasons. But what I started really thinking about with the Greenbelt Commission, when you go back and look at the resolution and what their intended purpose is, I'm afraid that just having 2 representatives on planning, they would get completely lost in the work of planning. That is a very intense workload for the planning commissioners. They meet every month. They're reviewing applications, and I'm not sure when they'd work that all in. I think we have a renewed interest in our trail system. That was one of the original things that they were charged with. We're on ongoing discussions right now about revitalizing Lake Thunderbird and ecotourism and all the opportunity that we have there. And I just worry about losing the impact that the Greenbelt Commission currently has, and the impact they have on applications that are coming before planning, because just in the last few months, there have been several applications that have come to City Council where the Greenbelt Commission has been instrumental in recommending to the developer to include more green space, trails. We just considered an application, I think the last council meeting, of literally connecting a private developed trail system between 2 different neighborhoods. And I'm not sure any of that would have happened if the Greenbelt Commission hadn't been at work. So that's my current thinking about that. Anybody want to comment on?
Well, if they're working together, are you saying that the majority of the meeting would be around planning and we wouldn't be able to get to so much of the Greenbelt discussion? Or?
Well, the Greenbelt Commission is made up currently of 9 members.
Okay.
And we would literally be dissolving the commission, and so there would be no prior advance work, because what they do is meet, and then they make recommendations on applications that go forward to planning.
Okay.
So we would be eliminating that step, we'd be eliminating that input, and then it would be up to whoever also had that dual role of representing the Greenbelt interests on the Planning Commission. I'm not sure when they'd work that in, honestly.
Okay.
So that's just my current thinking about it all. So comments about this particular one?
I think
Councilmember Holman.
I definitely understand the position of staffing these committees and making sure that the committees are filled with people and doing all that stuff. But I also do feel similar that I think these committees were probably created to address issues that councils in the past may not have thought had enough focus on them specifically, and maybe things that were being overlooked in larger committees or committees that had more of a scope of work to consider. And so that's been kind of my apprehension all along about reducing the committees, is, making sure that there are people, that we have a body that's just looking at green space. We have a body that all they think about is bikes. We have a body that all they think about is parks. And there is some potential overlap, as we've identified with other committees, but it is nice to be able to have that focus be on those specific things, and so that they don't get lost in a larger committee's discussion. But that definitely does have to be weighed with our ability to adequately staff and research and all those things too.
And I do know, just from speaking with some of the current members of the Greenbelt Commission that have been active for the last couple of years, that one of their frustrations has been that they would like to take more active role in some of the things that they were originally charged with. And this is the whole emphasis on making our greenways and our green belts a priority for our community, and getting back to the trail system. And we had a presentation about that pre-COVID too, that's just kind of still hanging out there. So to me, it just, like, their work has even over the last 2 years, with the consideration of all of the other things that we're taking a look at, that their work has become even more important than maybe it's been in the past.
And it does give us the opportunity as a council to, instead of having to go appoint an ad hoc committee for something, like we have the ability to say, well, can we send that over to the Greenbelt Commission to talk about the trail system, or send it to the Bike Advisory Board, which I did an oversight last year, trying to get them to talk about protected bike lanes. So it's nice having a board or a group that can say, I need this bike thing to be looked at. And so here's a group of bike people who are going to give us advice on what we should do. So that's, in some ways maybe more efficient than trying to appoint an ad hoc and find people. In some ways, I guess it couldn't be just the same. So there's a lot of good reasons to have these if we can, staff and do that.
Councilmember Shore.
Yeah, I guess my question, and something that's kind of been rattling around in my brain, related to this, but also kind of related to the full picture of like thinking about rearranging or consolidating, or and since I'm new-ish to this because you've been working on this for a number of years, as I'm looking at the spreadsheet with the number and kind of the breakdown, what kind of catches my eye is the frequency of meetings that each committee is having, and it kind of jumps out to me that there are some, I think, that are some really important committees, and some committees that I think are now starting to take center stage that are quarterly, like our Human Rights Commission, like the ADA Committee, like things that we are typically trying to discuss. Are there ways, and I don't know because I can't keep track of 36 committees because that's a lot of a lot to take in, but I know that when I was on a committee, there would be months when it was a monthly committee, and there would be months that would get canceled. And so was it looked at all to think about changing some of those monthly meetings to quarterly meetings to consolidate or break down the amount of time for staff where needed, and then changing some of the others that we need more time to talk about topics to a monthly structure, like the Human Rights Commission, or something that like they don't have enough time to talk about the things that they need to. And so like, was that a consideration of potentially how to restructure?
I'll just speak to the Human Rights Commission piece. So absolutely. So right now, with our structure, we, like I said, the discussion that we were able to have jointly just occurred on Monday. Prior to that, I had a conversation as we were looking at who would chair, after Sage decided not to continue. And part of the discussion with those potential chairs is we need to potentially look at monthly meetings, because if we need more time, if we need to discuss, if we need to really be able to keep things, moving, then we should discuss the option to increase our meeting schedule. And so, happy to share that both of the candidates at that moment shared interest as well to increase it. So, to your point, there are situations where, for instance, we could utilize having more time together.
Yeah, I'm not trying to create more work, but I'm also thinking like, are there some on here that maybe could go down to a quarterly because meetings get canceled routinely, right? So they're not meeting as regularly, and so that's, instead of just having that on the books as a monthly meeting, that's on, or there are, I guess maybe one or two on here that are like as needed around special reporting periods or things like that. Are there ways to look at this that are slightly different instead of just consolidating? Because as Councilmember Holman's to his point about like being able to have these robust discussions about really specific topic areas, like how important that has been for some of the things, especially like the Greenbelt Commission. And to this point, and to the discussion about Greenbelt and planning, I mean, just based on the conversation that we had this week about planning commission and development and things, I think that would probably be doing a disservice to just lump Greenbelt into planning. Like, they have such a high volume of work to do already. And so where would this conversation fit into that?
Yeah.
That's a concern. I think it would get lost.
So, to your point, are the times of the meetings, is that something that they are required to meet monthly, or is it the discretion of the committee to meet?
Depends.
Set their
Yeah, it
meeting?
depends.
Depends on the
Some of them
committee.
actually,
Yeah,
some of them, when created, actually codified
okay.
required meeting time, and I'm not sure why we did that.
Uh,
Seemed kind of silly. So, yeah, I mean, and a lot of them, you know, Catherine can say as well, have the flexibility of setting their annual schedule every year, and then if, for what is needed, and then if they need to meet in between, they can always call a special meeting, but
Yeah, it's- so like
we
the
also-
committee that you were on, the TIF Oversight Committee, that decision is made between the staff person who staffs it and the chair. Here are the things that are going on, do you think that's worth a meeting? Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. And so we filed the annual, schedule of meetings every year that you're required to do under the Open Meeting Act, but then you end up canceling when there's just not much to talk about.
And you have the authority to cancel.
With that one, they did, yeah.
So it seems like as long as we're going through this entire process, maybe we want to look at providing, you know, whatever we need to do to obviously honor the Open Meetings Act, but also create the flexibility with the committee and the chair of the committee. If they have, you know, if they have business that needs to be conducted monthly, great, but if they can reduce the number of meetings, I think they'd all be grateful too. So, so we might want to take a look at that to see if we need to get, you know, if it's codified in some way, if we can take that language out, but still require the posting of meeting times, but with the flexibility to limit
Absolutely.
the number.
You lose participation when you have meetings
Yeah.
with nothing meaningful to
Yes.
talk about.
Mhm.
People stop
Exactly.
coming.
Okay.
So that would be good.
Anything else about the Greenbelt, and then we can move down to proposal number 2. We good? Oh, Councilmember Holman.
Really just in general.
Okay.
So do other cities, are there cities that have like, how do they staff these committees? Do they have a department that's dedicated to this that's not part of the clerk's office? Or maybe it's a department of the clerk's department, or
I don't,
that type of thing?
I don't really remember when I did my polling asking that. I guess maybe I made an assumption they operate like we do, where it's staff, different staff supports them, but, and I misspoke about Oklahoma City, I just pulled that up a while ago, they do have a lot, they have more than we do. But even if if a lot of them are being staffed in the clerk's office, they also have a lot more employees than I do. And I'm sure that goes on in every department, especially since we're so lean here in Norman.
Right.
But that's something I can look at, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's, we talk about staffing in all the departments and a need for it, more of it in all departments. So, you know, talking about maybe cutting committees because of that, or that being a reason. I'd be interested in knowing what staffing would we need if we didn't want to
Right.
get rid of any committees. We wanted to beef it up even. You know, what would that look like? And is that your staff or other department staff or whatnot? But yeah, I'd be interested in knowing some information about that too.
Yeah. And that, I mean, some of that's gonna depend on the topics,
Right.
because, you know, like my staff doesn't ever go to Greenbelt Commission and present anything anymore, although we were very involved when they were adopting the Greenway Master Plan, because I staffed those. But if a topic came up, then we'd have to go, you know, that involved legal, we would go over it. But planning now takes on most of that, so it kind of depends on the topic. Certainly, the committees, it's pretty easy to identify the staff that has to do the minutes and all of that kind of stuff. But the preparation of the topics, it really depends on the topic that's being scheduled.
Okay. So proposal 2 was consolidating the tree board, the bicycle advisory committee, and the parks board. And that one's interesting because the tree board is established by code, the bicycle advisory committee by resolution, and the parks board by charter. So this one, interested in your perspective, and you're new to it all. But my current thinking about this is, and I'm kind of glad to see Mr. Olson here. The way that we have it currently drafted for proposed language, we are providing for expertise if we combined all these from, the tree board, the bicycle advisor committee, and the parks board. And this one, in kind of reviewing it, it does seem that it's possible that we could get synergy of all of those things together in one group, and how each of those areas of expertise could be represented, but also kind of work in common, because they do kind of seem to fit together. So, Councilmember Holman.
Yeah, I think part of me is if we're going to keep the Greenbelt Commission, one option could be the tree board and
That's
the
what I was thinking too.
That's what
yeah,
I was thinking.
tree and
Yeah.
parks could be part of Greenbelt,
Greenbelt,
and
yeah.
bicycle could either remain its own or be part of a transportation committee if we do create one of those. So that could be a good way.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think Parks Board and the Tree Board are a natural fit, or I think that those can go together seamlessly. The Bicycle Committee right now, I think that pertains a little bit more towards Public Works and Transportation, because
Yeah.
most of the bike lanes and things fall outside of parks. It does, we do have a staff member that does go to all the bike committee meetings, but like I said, that mostly pertains to transportation.
But you have a forester right in your office, right? So that
Exactly,
would
and
go
that's the
well
reason-
with
Yeah.
the Greenbelt.
Well,
That's what
So-
Greenbelt says.
Greenbelt staffed by planning.
Yeah.
Because they're a
Exactly. It's
review
under the
point
It'd
in
be
the
a more
development
natural
process.
staffing issue because the forester is in parks, if you
And Parks Board also,
combine it with parks.
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah.
you have to just keep in mind too, Parks Department are over a lot of our outlying other centers we have, like Senior Theater and Firehouse Art Center and the Historic Museum. So the Parks Board receives annual reports from each one of those groups every year. They receive annual reports from the people we contract with for sports, and
Yep.
so they're not just looking at parks.
Yeah, and
Like
all of our
Parks and Recreation.
Norm Ford operators are already starting to report to Park Board and give updates on how they're dealing with the community. So we do have full agendas, on our monthly meetings. Doesn't mean we can't add a few more things, but we're already going 2 or 3 hours on our monthly meetings already.
So in the interest of consolidation with the tree board, where would the natural fit be, would you say?
I think it would fit within the Parks Board.
Tree and
Tree and
parks.
park?
But not Greenbelt?
I mean, I think you could probably make a case for either way, but
Yeah.
since
Staffing wise, it works better.
staffing wise, it would
Parks
work
Board.
better to, how many committees do you staff?
Out of these, most of the ad hoc committees, the Public Arts Board, Park Board, and Tree Board.
Yeah,
So, go ahead.
I don't feel that bicycle advisories fits in that though.
Yeah.
Fits in with Parks Board.
I agree.
So
Transportation for sure.
either it's staying as its own or being part of a transportation or type of committee perhaps.
Well, especially now with the recent discussion we had about the kind of federal funding and how our transportation projects are being scored
Yeah,
with
yeah.
the emphasis on multimodal transportation. I agree with you. I see the bicycle piece as part of our multimodal transportation plan, not just recreational, not just a recreational thing. So that makes a lot of sense. So we can revisit that, but are we comfortable with the tree and parks keeping that consolidation, and you're comfortable with that as well? Okay, great.
And just to remind you too, I'm sure Councilmember Holman remembers this, but our newer members wouldn't have any way of knowing. The Bicycle Committee is actually a subcommittee of the Council Committee,
well,
Planning
there
and
you go.
Transportation Committee, and they report to that council subcommittee.
I think that's the only subcommittee of a
It
council
is.
committee that we have.
Okay, well, you can
Yeah.
think about
Well-
that too.
I mean, that kind of goes into the other suggestions of some other committees like Public Transit and Norman Transportation Committee. I guess we might get to those, but just CPTC is kind of that, except we don't have any public members on it.
So I'm assuming you'll.
Except for the Bicycle Advisor is a citizen subcommittee of.
Okay,
So
well, I'm
I could
assuming you'll
create
have
another
some comments
subcommittee
about
of
that, yeah.
CPTC that's public transit, so, yeah.
Okay, so are we comfortable with 2, the direction? Okay. 3 was rescope the Animal Welfare Oversight Committee, so the first thing that has to happen is to basically dissolve it as a ad hoc committee, right?
Yes.
So, so where are we with that? I don't recall the discussion about this one in particular, other than, you know, we needed to do just some technical fixes, but on here it said needed further discussion about possible updates to duties. So who,
I don't think we've had that discussion yet.
okay,
Yeah.
Or council hasn't had that discussion
Okay.
yet. I mean,
Yeah, at the last meeting, Councilmember Bierman is the one that talked about,
Right.
you know, they review the statistics every month.
Yeah.
They could assist with, you know, Facebook posts and things like that, but that was really as far as the discussion went.
okay.
Um,
So it sounds like we probably need a little further review. I certainly don't feel like I have much to contribute about the Animal Welfare Oversight Committee, so I'd want to get some,
And I'm happy to
Staff
talk
input,
with
yeah.
Jeannie in my office,
Okay.
goes to those meetings. I've never been, so
Okay.
I feel the same as you
Okay.
do.
Well,
But then, of course,
I went
Animal
to the
welfare
one
staff.
where they discussed about the bear,
yes,
and so I think that's a critical
Yes.
piece, and so the coordination between Cleveland County and Norman Police Department, and since the
state wildlife.
state wildlife,
Department.
so like I think that's a natural fit as a duty as that kind of comes online, and those conversations about training and the mobile units that they're gonna have for wildlife, like bears and mountain lions or whatever else could potentially come. So like, I think that could be a major piece of that. I'm also wondering too, since the animal shelter is I mean under the police department,
Right.
like where is there another natural fit? Is this its own committee? Is it a subcommittee of public safety? Like, is it, I don't know, like what,
It's its own.
I know it is now.
Yeah.
I'm saying, what does it become? Is the question.
Oh, to remove it from the ad hoc status? I think just a permanent committee,
standing
right?
committee.
I mean, it currently, the members, because it was an ad hoc committee, have no term limits. They
Okay.
don't even have terms.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just on
Well,
there
we
till
definitely
they
want to address
like,
that,
till
yeah.
they quit or they move or something.
Councilmember Holman?
Yeah, I was on the committee for the first 3 years that I was on council, and I was very glad to hand it over to Councilmember Hickman. He was enthusiastic about joining it, so I was like, you can have it. I don't have any pets, so.
Or bears?
Yeah, and there was a lot of contention in the committee, towards some staff. There was some staff issue with the people, the director of the facility at the time. There was, since the committee was never supposed to be permanent, there was disagreement about what their roles were, what power they did or didn't have. And there was a lot, when I was there was a lot of discussion because the new animal welfare center had just opened. And there were issues, HVAC issues, there were things that they tried to flesh out. But, and that committee is where I met Kate and Sarita originally. So, so yeah, I would definitely like to get it cleared up that it's long-term and it is or isn't oversight, whatever, is it recommendatory,
Right.
and having the terms set. And having the kind of the expertise stuff. That's where I met Joe Carter too. So 3 council members is where I met in that committee. So, because he was serving on it as a citizen when I first met him.
And it seems like that would also be a committee where you'd want some professional expertise represented, I mean, some citizen input for sure, but also, defining a seat for some professional expertise.
Yeah,
of some
especially
sort.
since, that I guess, from what I understand, what I've always understood, the intent of the committee was to oversee getting a new shelter and seeing it through.
Which
and
is
once
why
it
it
was
was
through,
ad hoc in the first place.
right?
Yeah.
And then once that was done, what now?
That was
But-
a pet adoption facility, so that even tells you how far
Yeah,
back.
yeah, pet
Because
adoption
when they
facility.
first built that, that's what they were.
But we have seen that there are a lot of issues
Yeah.
involving animals in Norman, especially with our large footprint, rural area and all that, with different wildlife that can come up.
So it does seem that, we definitely, at rescope, I guess is the perfect word, that we probably have the desire to have a permanent committee there, but really define
Yep.
all of the other things that we're doing with the rest of them as far as terms and, technical expertise to be represented and that sort of thing. Okay, what else do you need on that, anything?
That's good for us to.
pet ownership?
Yeah.
I was actually attacked by a large dog when I was a kid, so it almost killed me. So.
Oh dear.
But I never
So,
had that animal.
One of the other things that you all talked about that is coming up with some standard language where the terms meant the same regardless of what committee it was.
Yeah.
The word oversight, for instance.
yes,
Or is it an advisory committee? Is it recommendatory? Is it, so what does oversight mean? Because it means different things on some of these committees that have that word in it. So-
right.
Yeah.
Well, and as you can see from, the summary sheet, we know how that's all been defined so far, and, unless somebody has another, go ahead, maybe you.
No, I think that's a great point. I think that was some of it too, is some members would think we're an oversight committee, so we need to be looking at the budget and the staff and all these different aspects of how the facility operates. Others would say, well, if it's an advisory committee, they're giving advice to us on how things should go instead of. So I think that does need to be clear, because there were definitely members that didn't
So I'm
agree on that.
comfortable with staff guidance on standardizing that language too, to match up with what its function is, and if we want to reflect that in the committee or clear up anything that you think is ambiguous, I'm good with that. How about anybody else?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so proposal 4 was eliminate the Children's Rights Coordinating Commission. I think that's probably been fleshed out multiple times.
That was the one I didn't have
Yeah.
on my other list.
Yeah.
What you said that hadn't met in 4 or 5 years. What was that committee for? How did it come about? And why hasn't it met for 4 or 5 years? Because to me, children's rights is a pretty big deal.
They didn't have the authority to, hear complaints and things like that, like the Human Rights Commission, and if there was something to that level, at the time, council and several councils now back, felt like that those could all be handled under human rights. And mostly what they did was work with the school system, and they would get a report, and they met quarterly or something. They'd get a report from Norman Public Schools about issues, and it just turned into where they just kind of fizzled out.
Now, the appointments were from the school system, the medical community, child welfare, family counseling, and the legal system. And I will tell you, the school has a meeting during the school year monthly that has a lot of these same people. They also come to our juvenile court now, and that's something that wasn't happening back then as much as it is now. But they're plugged in still, they're just not plugged in through this commission.
And I'm assuming that if there was any issue on the municipal side, that it could be referred to the Human Rights Commission. Would that be
Yeah.
correct? Okay. Okay.
I want to go on record saying this just because I feel like I understand it hasn't met, but I feel like it's a very important thing. the people that you described that were on the committee is great, but at this point in time, based off of just findings and knowing that there's racial disparities in our school system, and nobody's there to advocate for those kids who are either being pulled out of class for whatever reason, being picked on, and they're, having issues with SRO officers, whatever the case may be, who's going to advocate for those kids if we don't have something like this? So
Could you
how
ex-
would,
So
Could
this
you
question
explain
about
the
jurisdiction.
Yeah,
too.
I was gonna, could you explain the jurisdiction between the city of Norman as a municipality and the school board, the Norman Public School, as a separate government entity?
Sure, yeah, they are separate political subdivisions under state law, and so, of course, they have their own governing body, we have our own governing body, and we don't really have jurisdiction over how the school operates. And that wasn't the purpose of the Children's Rights Commission to begin with. It was more to recommend changes to city stuff, city laws, city issues related to children's needs in the community versus the school district. It's just that I think the school district was included, as far as I can tell, because they obviously interact with a lot of kids.
sir, are you saying then that we as a city don't have control over how and why our SRO officers interact with certain students?
No, we have a contract with the school district that allows for the SROs and policies in place for that. But what we don't have control is what the school does with those issues.
But we have control over how the police, that our SRO officers are treating
Those are
children in our schools.
employees, yes.
Okay. And where would that be covered at then? In what commission would those kinds of issues be handled if we're not going to have a Children's Right Commission?
Well, it depends on the issue. We do have the committee, and I'm blanking on the name, Daryl, the police.
Public safety oversight.
No,
the
the citizen committee for use of force incidents and other issues. They are brought those type of issues, and they review those issues. But that's been the primary source for that review.
Interesting. Okay.
And I'm assuming the first place such an issue would be identified is at school, that if the school district recognized that an issue had taken place, the complaint would happen with the principal somewhere on site, regardless of the age of the student, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school.
Or to our internal affairs division of the police department, and they always conduct their own investigation. So whether it's the school contacting them or a citizen filing a complaint, anyone that goes over there and files a complaint, IA does an investigation on it.
It's just, I just am speaking from a parent that took my student out of school. If your administration and your police are the issue, who do you go to talk to? So I'm just gonna leave that. All right, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. That's what this is all about. Okay, number 5, increase committee membership on the Board of Adjustment. I think you reviewed that and what the reasoning was there. And so, does anyone have any comment on that, or can we just move forward with that one?
All of them are at large.
Yes, yeah. We don't have that many boards that have ward specific.
And this one would be increased from 5 to 7, right? That's
Right.
really the point.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, when you were talking about the difficulty of a quorum, I was at attended a Oklahoma Municipal League legislative committee yesterday, and they were pursuing, being able to have the ability to move back and forth between virtual and in-person meetings, which we have not accomplished yet. Then there's literally a municipality in Oklahoma right now that has 5 people on their council. They've all tested positive for COVID, and they have no way to meet.
Yep.
So,
Wow.
there you go. Okay, so proposal number 6, increase committee membership on the Norman Election Commission, and that the changes, really, the only change is to increase the number from 5 to 7, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
and that is a commission that I support. I provide staff support for, and oftentimes, because our meetings are structured around when report filings are due, it's not unusual for me not to have a quorum.
So you have the same problem?
Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
same problem, so
Okay.
more members would help.
Any comments on that one? Okay. Okay, so now, Proposal 7, create the following new committees: Senior Issues Committee, Youth Advisory Committee, Transportation Committee, Budget Committee, and Core Norm and Development Committee. And now we're also considering adding a POC committee. Now, at the April meeting, I know I was the one that recommended removing the Core Norm and Development Committee from the discussion for now because, and I still feel the same way, what we do have in place is an ad hoc structure for the council for Center City Form-Based Code Committee that I still feel that's really what we need to be reinstituting for the short term. And instead of, for as hard as we're working to not create more, I'm perfectly comfortable with taking that one off the table for now. So, if anybody else has any input on that. Okay.
Not any input on that specifically, but this, do we have any idea of like specifics on what these committees outside of, I mean, we have more clarification of the POC committee, but the Youth Advisory Committee, is that something that could be addressed, what Councilmember Studley is talking about? Like, what is the scope of what the proposal for that committee is? Like, is that a place where that might fit?
I'm trying to recall.
In terms of children and reporting structures and advocacy?
Do you recall what, I can look back and, this is November.
What the youth advisor.
What we were talking about?
I
What's
think
that?
it's something,
Oh,
go ahead,
ahead.
Catherine.
I was thinking that was going to, maybe that was Mayor Clark's idea, as a sort of a refinement of our youth council that we do every year.
That's
Okay.
it.
And to pull that into a committee instead, and
Middle
that would
school,
actually be made
high
up of
school.
students.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that might be a way to get some of those, the input and the perspective of the student.
Yes.
And yeah, it was her idea, and the thought was instead of the process they have now, where it's a council and they get educated on what the municipal government does, and which is, they all really enjoy that, but I think her goal was more to get input from them, to provide input to council on different issues that are related to youth.
Okay.
Would it be
Policy.
middle school and high school students, or do we haven't gotten that far?
I don't think
I
we
don't
ever
think
got that far, but
Okay.
it's
I
I mean,
certainly,
currently that program are junior and seniors, but
Right.
it could be retooled however.
And how is that staffed currently?
my department.
Okay, so you already have to provide staffing
Right.
for that. So what are your thoughts about creating a different format?
I don't think it's a bad idea if, instead of youth council, that doesn't change the workload for us.
Okay.
Jeannie
And
does
summers off
that,
potentially.
and Jeannie and Deidre in my office do that, and it's a labor of love for those two. They really enjoy working with the kids, and so
Yeah.
I think, whether it's this committee or the youth council, they would thrive. But
We can put it together in a
one or the
similar
other.
structure with all the other.
I mean, probably not both. The youth council's heavily focused on field trips and,
Seeing everything.
seeing all the stuff, the water treatment plant, the wastewater treatment plant. It's
Well, it
really
seems
fun
like-
for the kids, but
Seems like you would be able to combine, add a new dimension to it.
yeah.
Still provide an opportunity to do those kinds of things, but provide a new dimension to it. And one of the things that I'm just thinking is, we had a very impressive presentation by Elliot Metz on the Vote 16 proposal. And this would be an avenue for them maybe to pursue some policy recommendations.
Yeah,
Councilmember Holman?
I definitely envisioned it to be able to include middle and high school at least. And then have it set up to, they still do the field trips and see all the city stuff, but maybe that they do actually participate and come up with advisory on policy that we're working on. And it could be a thing where there's an option, you could serve 2 years or, whatever it may be, but give them an opportunity where it's not just 1 year. You could be on the advisory council part. Maybe you don't go on the field trips the next year, but you're able to serve on this advisory body for, you know, something like that.
Well, and another thing
Like an
that,
evolution of those
Yeah.
members.
yeah,
Yeah.
and another thing that I know Mayor Clark is promoting is her
CEO.
CEO scholarship program, and that might be
Where you're
another
finding your
leadership
members.
piece, or
Yeah.
a part of the scholarship would be to provide some leadership in that group too. I mean, so
Yeah,
you
you
might
do
be
it
able
for more
to,
than just 1 year.
Yeah.
and-
yeah. So it sounds like we're already staffing anyway, so we're not creating any new burden, just a different way of looking at it. Okay, so want to move forward with seeing what that might look like?
Yeah, and then,
Okay.
what I could just-
So the transportation committee, that really circles back to bicycle advisory, so how are you seeing that one?
Well, I could see bicycle advisory being a part of a transportation committee. That transportation committee could also look at public transit too. So a public body, a public committee that looks at bikes, transportation and transit. And maybe that's a subcommittee of the CPT still.
Because RTA, citizens, there's something going on currently. I just have these little weird flashes of, I saw an email that said something about RTA, community updates and those
Yes.
kinds of things. So if the
I saw that
bike
same email.
committee starts out to be the nucleus of the transportation committee, and you add members who can stay in tune with RTA, and of course, how do you get to the train station? It may be your bike, and it really becomes that intermodal.
So
Body.
I'm assuming that would be public works staffing?
It's who
Should they
generally
staff it
comes to
now?
my meetings is usually.
That's who's staffing bike right now. Well, Jamesburg goes to from Parks, but David Riesland, it used to be Angelo, is kind of the main one, but that one uniquely, I'm not sure how they work this in, but
The bicycle?
their
Okay.
chair prepares the agendas, and I think he does the minutes.
Wow.
Nice.
I want to get one of them.
Okay.
And the library board functions like that too.
Uh-huh.
They have a secretary, they elect a secretary just like they do a chair and a vice chair, and
Huh.
that secretary prepares the minutes.
I mean,
That's a good one.
there's an
That's
acronym
not
for
a
that.
bad philosophy.
Who does the?
PAB does the same
Oh,
thing.
Public Arts Board.
Well.
Well, I would be okay
There's
with
an avenue to
taking
pursue
the
that.
bike advisory board that's under CPTC,
Expectation.
change the name up to transportation, or
Mhm.
Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee or whatever.
Yeah.
And it being bikes, public transit, and transit, in general,
Yeah.
transportation, transit. and
I
bikes.
think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you know better than anybody, Councilmember Holman, but what we're looking towards in the next few years of regional cooperation and, a regional transit tax and, commuter rail and all the things, it just seems like that would,
Yeah.
What did you call it, Councilmember Holman?
Citizens,
Citizens, Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee.
rolls off your tongue.
okay.
You gotta be able to say the acronym.
All right, so again, that sounds like we already have some current staffing in place and might help out, a lot of the other initiatives that we're gonna be considering in the coming years.
Yep.
To have that, citizen input. The budget committee,
Tell us more about this budget committee.
well, I think it's intended to be some kind of advisory.
It was a request from a citizen that moved here from someplace up north
In a small town.
in a small town, and they had a budget committee.
Okay.
And she was on it, so when she moved to Norman, she thought it would be nice if we had something similar. It was a smaller town, and I can't remember the full story, as if they didn't have a large staff. But I think when it was talked about before in this committee, it was talked about that it could function during, as council's, going through the budget preparation process, and it wouldn't be year-round, it would just be during that window. But it never was really determined, I don't think, what they would do. I don't remember that part.
Yeah. Councilmember Schuler?
I mean, it seems like there's been a lot of heightened awareness around our budget the last several years, and I don't think that that is going away. And I think that our citizens are kind of hungry for avenues to engage in that process and understand and have a mechanism to hear their voices heard, to kind of work through that process with us. And so, I mean, I personally am in favor of something like this to have an advisory role and to kind of help us work through, and it gives us another touch point.
And
go ahead.
operationally, because I think that's a great description, and it takes that conversation, and what that may boil down to is when you have, what our new customary number of participants will be, to make sure that when we start those study sessions with council, that they get the invitation and that they would be expected to show up and participate when council's going through each one of the steps of the budget development process. So then you're kind of pulling them along with you, so everybody doesn't show up in May or June. That if you're going to show up in May or June, we want you to start showing up in January and listen with council and ask questions and share your thoughts with your council members, so by the time we get to May, they see their fingerprints on it.
And I think in some ways it really creates an avenue for more citizens to have more touch points than just us, right? So it's another filter point to kind of get ideas through, than just like us trying to navigate through all of our emails and all of the other things that we're trying to digest as we're looking through council meetings and study sessions and all of that kind of stuff. Like, it really creates kind of this group that kind of walks along that path with us, and that they can activate members of the community as well.
So it could be, a member
What if
from
it was
each
ward
ward.
specific?
Yeah,
Right,
there-
that's
there
what
are
I'm
eight
thinking.
I was
such
thinking
bodies.
ward specific, but also it shouldn't just be around budget time. They need to be able to participate with city staff and you as well as you're creating that budget and what that looks like for our community.
Well,
So
budget,
it's not
budget
just
time is year round.
Right.
I know,
Yeah.
but he was saying like
Yeah.
whenever we're discussing it with council, they should be meeting with you and city staff long before it gets to council to hash some of this stuff out.
That would be interesting.
Well, we really do
To be in the
start in
soup making the
September
sausage,
as the
yes.
council. So we take a month or two off, and then monthly finance meetings, the council is involved, starting in September. Do I have it right? Councilmember Holman?
I mean, yeah, I was gonna say, could it be maybe a subcommittee of the finance committee? This finance committee has a citizens advisory.
Yep, and
Right.
like CPTC to be
Right.
the venue to bring those
And then
thoughts
it
and
is year round,
ideas.
sort of, or
Right.
as needed, or I don't know how, however it's desired.
Yeah,
But
no
I do
new
think
staffing,
the
that- I
budget
mean, that's
seems
one
to
of
be
those
the,
that
Right.
makes staffing easy.
the budget is the one thing that myself and other council members over the years have really like pounded the table about. Please come, and then
Yes.
finally people are getting interested in it, and it is covers all aspects of the whole city operations. So that's the one people tend to be the most critical about. And so if we have a citizens group that we say, hey, yeah, we the council, the elected body, we've made decisions, but we also made those decisions based off of the citizen
And it would really be helpful.
citizen group that we have.
I mean, when you talk about the heightened interest, which is a good thing,
Yes.
it would really be helpful if we did it on a ward-specific basis, because we could use that person as a liaison to the community and actually even, go through a lot of the comments or
it
watch
would be
social
good partners
media
for us.
or,
Well, and
all
when,
of that. It would be wonderful.
the
and
RTA
helpful.
question
So
comes,
helpful.
this
Yeah.
person has been on the inside, and how the RTA links in with our, and you've got one, another voice in each ward to say, oh,
Yes.
hey, trust me, this is a good idea, I've been in there every month, and
Yeah.
this is what we've been plowing away.
So-
If those meetings, if what that might mean is like the finance committee meetings, we have to meet in the bigger room
Yep.
just because that's not a bad thing at all.
And the other
And
thing
also-
I'd like to throw out there is,
Gonna
you
keep
know,
saying
we started a conversation about participatory budgeting.
Yes.
And we've actually talked before that conversation about, would it be possible to have, a discretionary fund per ward of, you know, a modest sum that you could have your ward participate in a ward-specific project. I mean, and if you know, really dive deeper into the participatory budgeting process, there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. But I'm really intrigued with, because we're, in the budget process, we're obviously attacking things on a community-wide basis, of having the potential of ward residents defining a need in their ward and being able to work through the process to actually, you know, you might compete for a number of projects, or, and having a representative from the ward in that capacity too. I mean, you could tie a lot of things into that, so.
They're typically capital in nature.
Yes.
And then, you know, in the capital budget, it's a pretty comfortable
Yep,
place to say, we're gonna,
okay.
because we do it with every one of our transportation bonds, we make sure every ward sees benefits from the list of projects, and that's,
So, any other thoughts or comments about that? Pat, you think that's a really intriguing idea? So, the other one that was on here was the Senior Issues Committee, and this is a question for you, Mr. Olson, because the Senior Wellness Center has a operator now,
Yes.
and, I don't know what the functions are of the ad hoc advisory committees that we have in place now. Once these projects are completed, what happens to the input from the ad hoc type of setup? I'm
Well-
assuming that goes away.
Typically once the project's done and we cut a ribbon, they would dissolve.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, it would be an interesting concept to probably, well, sitting here, haven't put much thought to it, but it's possible to have a senior group that kind of advises on and works with the senior wellness group and parks to go through issues or other city issues. Then again, I think that the operator is planning on having a board of directors made up of Norman citizens to kind of do the same thing. at the same
And I
time.
realized that maybe the origin of this was,
That's
you
what
know,
I was gonna
more global in nature, like a companion to a youth committee, a senior committee, but do we have any, I don't really remember.
No, I don't remember either, but I was remembering from the operator's
Yeah.
interview that this is something they do in Oklahoma City now, and so it does provide a good avenue, and maybe it helps increase participation at the senior center too.
But I'm wondering if we could possibly start there as we move through, you know, working with the operator, and as we open the senior wellness center, if that might be just part of the governance, or, you know, that would be a place to start, and then if we felt a need to expand that, we could
if they
revisit
keep
that.
bringing issues outside the scope of senior wellness, that'd be a
Yeah.
great thing.
No, that's kind of what I was thinking too, is it be like the senior advisory committee, and they meet at the senior center. It's their, you know, they're not necessarily governing the senior center.
Well, no,
but
no.
That's their
Right.
base of operation. They can give
Right.
us advice about what, you know, we need to be doing.
I guess what I was thinking about is that might already be a group that the
Right.
operator has to help with all manner of things of programming and, you know,
Yeah.
getting feedback on that kind of thing.
It could be, but if you do have your senior advisory group like that, they would definitely need to be a part of it, I think. So,
Yeah.
because there'd be a lot of programs that they could
Yeah,
work together on to make sure all those get satisfied.
Even a conversation about what happens with the existing facility when the new facility's
Yeah.
built, and how does that evolve into its next life?
and then, I wanna make sure we have time to talk about the, POC committee. So if we could just quickly work through the proposal 8, which is change every committee appointment in chapter 4 to 3-year terms, 3-year term limit.
What's chapter 4?
That's
Just
where
like
the
the-
commissions.
All these chapters sit.
in the code that has all the boards.
Councilmember Holman?
Does that mean just one 3-year term? That's it?
No,
No.
3-year terms.
3-year terms.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my question too.
And again, I always go back to the Historic District Commission. I mean, it's spelled out, before you ever come to your first meeting, you have the possibility, you serve a 3-year term, you're usually, I think this is common with a lot of committees, you most likely will be invited to, stay on the board if you have an interest in doing that. But after 3-year terms, so after 9 years, you're term limited, basically. With the Historic District Commission, you just step away for a year, and if it's something you want to come back to, you can. So we could, think
I
about
think
that.
Historic District and the Hospital Board are the only ones that have that
Uh-huh.
in their, the Hospital Board, I think, has it in their bylaws, not in our ordinance.
Code.
My only concern about it has just been losing expertise and,
Yeah.
sometimes can be difficult to find
Definitely got to
people that have the time
Right.
and the knowledge to step in. So it's always been, you end up with having people that serve for 20 years, and you want to get more people opportunity at the same time, but also you don't want to send somebody off who's got all this information and knowledge and experience when there may not have been anybody else interested or whatever else.
Yeah,
So
and we've
that's
talked
kind of
pretty
always-
consistently about how we need to make sure we add some flexibility in that.
Yeah.
It's not like, okay, your 9 years is up.
Situations like that.
No, there's
Yeah.
no chance. It's like, well, 9 years is up, and we've got somebody waiting, and we think they'd be good. So
Because it seems like we have talked about this multiple times now, and I think the understanding was most of the committees and most of the people who volunteer, this would help with, if this is something you really like to do, you can certainly do this for an extended period of time, but at some point, we'd like to get, have other people have opportunity, but if we have
No interest.
we don't have that many things where being on the board for 20 years is, Norman Housing Authority, so I'm gonna, again, sort of kick that back to you of trying to figure out where that sweet spot is of allowing for those kind of circumstances while still having,
I mean, I will add-
consistent across the board.
Yeah, as the one that works with the mayor on these appointments and the one that gets the applications, there are some boards that obviously have more interest than others and, for whatever reason, or 60 or whatever. And then there are some that nobody have never applied. They just don't get any applications for them. And those are the ones you have to kind of go out and try to recruit someone. I mean, so for a lot of people to think that, we just have all these people wanting to serve and they're not getting a chance.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that's
If
not,
only.
that's not the full picture.
And that's the other thing, I think that's probably important to say right now, that there is a lot of turnover on our boards and committees and commissions. And even when we're in the range of 5 to 7 to 9, that seems to be the most common range, that we struggle all the time to make sure that our committees are up and running and fully
We can get to a quorum.
staffed. And the, quorum issue, so, the size of the committee is probably really important too. So-
I know the chamber is pushing chamber members and Norman next to say, there's opportunities, please go put
Yeah.
your name in the hat.
Okay, so any other comments about,
Just to clarify this
Yeah.
language about that it's three-year terms, because I think the language is confusing.
okay,
Yeah, that was pointed out last time.
Okay. It just it makes no sense. It's like,
We just did fix it.
okay.
On these proposal committees, the ones including the POC committee,
yeah, we're gonna talk about that.
well, what is the timeline of implementing and getting these up and running? If they are, since we're approving or not
Well,
approving.
welcome to,
Yeah, so
City government.
this will be a lot of drafting, and so we'll want to come back to you all for sure on feedback. I mean, some of this is really clear, but where we're rescoping or developing scopes for new committees, I'm going to need your feedback, so I'll
And of
come back
course, if
to you
you're
at least once, maybe
Amending
more,
the
depending on how
municipal
much.
code, it's public hearings and first reading and second reading, and 30 days later it
And
goes
we're in the
into
middle of
effect.
recodification, so we've got a little bit of time to get this hammered out before we would want to take it forward anyway, so
Yeah, we
we'll
wouldn't
work
want-
on it.
And I think Catherine touched on this earlier. I don't know that we would want to take this forward before we adopt the recodified code, because you're basically gonna be adopting, the entire code again in its entirety. And so if this comes in before that, and they've already cut off adding in new ones, cause you have to cut off a window and then go back and pick up on those, would, just be really messy.
And I think
when are
this
we
is
doing
one of
that
the
then?
renumbered.
We're getting towards the
chapters.
end of that. We
Okay.
probably are,
Ongoing.
Okay.
have about the
October?
last, yeah, October-ish, November, something like that.
Once they get us their next draft, which is about 2 binders this thick,
Okay.
Jeannie will go through it and we'll go through it and make sure we're good with it and then bring it
Don't leave that.
forward.
I mean, yeah, you're looking
it's
for
2 binders.
typos and commas
So-
and.
Those are some
oh.
really long Zoom calls with Catherine and Jeannie and I and their attorney, but I would not want to have that job at Municipal Code Corporation. That has to be,
So what I'm hearing you
Special
say is that this will come back to oversight one more time, and these new ones would be fully fleshed out
Right.
and also reviewed so that it meets the legal language of everything else that needs to happen. And then at that point, it would go to a study session, I'm assuming, for the
Right.
whole council to consider.
Yep, so
Is that-
after the whole
is that
municipal
right?
code is readopted, then you can bring these,
So it sounds like it would
Amendments to
be
it.
probably the beginning of 23,
22.
22, okay.
Yeah. But the good news is we're moving along.
Yes.
This was 2019, remember, this is when we
Fast-paced.
started. So,
Fast-paced race.
wowie.
well, we're probably beating the pace
Thinking
of
6 months
Airbnb and
Yeah.
scooters, so.
Yeah.
hey,
Ooh, we might have to have a award. Agenda item hanging around for the longest time. Okay, so, I just want to say that, the Oversight Committee meeting is always on the same night as the Planning Commission, so we have to share the services of Bryce, so we have 30 minutes max, and we really need to stop. Is that right? Okay.
Correct.
So, just as a reminder for everybody. So, I just wanted to bring everybody up to date. I'm glad we had a chance to actually read the letter into the record, and you all have a little time to let that sift through. And so, basically, where we are with this is, I want to recognize Miss Ashley Morrison. Ashley has come forward to the Human Rights Commission with her proposal about the Norman Commission on People of Color Affairs. And just to give you some background about Ashley, she is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant for Rootism. She's also a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant for the Resonator Institute, which is a 501c3. She's the founder of For the Black Future, and she also served on the Inclusive Communities Subcommittee of the Human Rights Commission. And it's really been my pleasure to get to know you and work with you over the last year or so. And so she came forward to the Human Rights Commission with her proposal. As Ms. Allen said, she presented her proposal at the HRC meeting on July 26th. And then at that point, they recommended, is that the right word? Recommended that we move forward and bring it to the Oversight Committee. And then they also had a special meeting on Monday, this past Monday, on August 9th, to continue discussion and possible action regarding the HRC committee recommendation to create a person of color advisory committee, including but not limited to its proposed mission and overview. So you've had a little bit of time to, and this is the first time they've actually seen the letter, just so you know, because you came in a little bit late, but.
No pressure.
Yeah, so I just want to open it up to any comments or questions that you have, and I'm happy if you have questions for Ms. Morrison, happy to get her at the, in the conversation.
I have
So,
questions.
okay, well, you'd want to just start generally with staff stuff, or where you want to start?
Well, I remember seeing at the Human Rights Commission the long kind of proposal, and it talked about the number of board members, which is well in excess of
Yeah.
any that we have right now. So I was just curious what the thought process was behind that, and if it's, what was the total number again? Sorry.
21.
21, okay.
21, and I know that sounds like a really big number, but That number was, I thought that would be ideal. Just a little kind of a forward. I modeled a lot of the articles document based off of the Tulsa Greater African American Affairs Commission. I thought it was a really kind of like a blessing in the strategizing process to have something that's similar in its efforts that's also in the state of Oklahoma. I also feel like Tulsa and Norman are both kind of big, relatively progressive cities alongside Oklahoma City, so I thought, okay, this could be a good bridging of efforts. I love connecting people and building relationships in that way. That's one of my favorite things as a consultant. So the 21 members sounded ideal. The Inclusive Community Subcommittee was about 21, 22 members, and that was in consideration for the fact that this commission would be a people of color commission, which in POC means non-white, and that covers a variety of ethnicities. I did research. Christina was also Christina, new chair, was also very elemental in helping with research as well. And most commissions that we found were disciplined. They weren't interdisciplinary. So it was African American Commission, AAPI Commission, and so forth. And Tulsa, as I said, is a great example. So I thought 21 would be ideal to cover the variety. And then, you know, again, with ICS, that's kind of what the makeup was there too, right? A large group of diverse people, and I felt like the selection process there was a great job done by HRC.
Go ahead.
Are you wanting to have representation, like two people from each ward? Or is that, what was your thoughts on?
So there is, so the membership is drafted to be maximally POC, and to whatever degree that might look like. I do know that the Tulsa Commission is exclusively Black membership, so I'm curious. We did discuss some ways to promote a maximal representation while, you know, staying within lines of what we all feel is ideal. So, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought there a little bit.
Oh, I was just asking about if you were gonna have at least like a minimum of two.
Yes, I'm
people
sorry,
from each ward.
thank you,
No, you're
yes.
fine.
So in the first article, there's a listing for a member from the city attorney's office, a member from the HRC, and I believe a third member, but the office of contacts is listed in the first article. Okay. And that would allow, just similar to kind of the way that the ICS was approached, they had some sitting HRC members that weren't necessarily there to vote, but to consult. Christina Bell from the city attorney's office was there as well, and Bria certainly visited some of those efforts. So I didn't consider a city council member being part of the membership in the proposal, but again, the proposal is kind of like a vision, but I'm curious about
It wasn't
that.
for city council, just to have representation from each ward, a person of color from each ward, to kind of represent, not council.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
And then my last question, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Is, do you anticipate, because it seems like this particular committee would kind of address some of the issues that I brought up a moment ago about the racial disparities that are not only in our city, but also in our schools. So is that something that you anticipate this group could help navigate through in our community?
absolutely, and I love that you asked that. So written into the articles document is a prioritization to create or co-create a platform for local grassroots efforts. And as you know, there are a lot of grassroots folks. And when I say grassroots folks, I mean the people that kind of like do this for free 99 on a regular basis and are involved in efforts ranging from public food pantries and homelessness to school issues. So there are existing grassroots efforts that are really interested in resolving issues of diversity and equity within schools. So I would imagine that would actually fall right under the umbrella of the mission.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Schuler.
Just to follow up on some of Councilmember Stelly's questions about the 21 members, when you were describing some of the people that might be on that, were you also including in the 21 members some of the staffing So you mentioned someone from like the city attorney's office and something like that. Would like that also, was your intent that that is also included in the 21 members?
Definitely, and
Okay.
I can, I really, and I apologize
No,
for
that's
this,
okay.
I can just pull up the proposal and get a little more specific on that.
Sure.
So under Article 1, and again, this was just a vision, I approached, I know that residents can, kind of apply to get on the city council study session agenda, but I approached the HRC because I was hoping to collaborate and really build this. And then the next move, the ideal, the fantasy, is that I stay involved in the process as a consultant. And I've also gotten in touch with some members from the Tulsa African American Commission, so I'm really excited about that. But just have to plug that in there real quick. So in Article 1, the principal office is the City of Norman. The commission will maintain that office as a contact. Just kind of breezing through here. Meeting office is listed. Okay, and then another contact. Commission shall be the contact of a designated officer, role, and/or City of Norman liaison. So similar to the ICS effort, just someone there to occupy, I guess, the membership as a liaison between relative entities, so HRC, City Council, and so forth. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, Councilmember
Yeah.
Holman, did you have another question?
No, I just was gonna say, it just helps us think about, like, we have, most of our, committees are much smaller to that point, and so if we're thinking about 21 members, but that's not just the amount of, like, citizens, it's helpful to think of that. So 21 members, like, there are lots more people here than, like, are sitting on our committee. And so it's helpful for us to kind of think through, like, what's the actual
Absolutely.
citizen number?
Right.
Is that different than the 21?
Citizen number 21, and
Okay.
then the Office of Contacts and
So
Liaisons
extra.
outside of that.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's
Okay.
how ICS was, I believe, as well.
So,
Yeah.
and just for clarification, that was discussed extensively at HRC too, and so the HRC recommendation was, considering possibly up to 21. And we've, I think, had enough of a conversation at this point that, this is a proposal and she's put a lot of work into a draft.
Absolutely.
And at this point, depending on how we want to move forward, it would go back to city staff for, review and that sort of thing. Councilmember Holman?
Yes, so would maybe want to see if there's some other cities our size and if they have any committees like this. 'Cause I'm thinking 21, but Tulsa area has a lot more people that might be interested. I mean, I think we could probably get 21 people. And if that means more people get to participate, I'm all for that. And because just and as we got the message from Daryl earlier, we've got some new census data out
Yeah.
today. So we'll have a updated idea of what our demographics are in Norman. But just in 2010, it had, white making up the majority, but African American, Native American, Asian, Pacific Islander, Hispanic or Latino, and then there was even 5.5% that just says from 2 or more. And so there's a lot of different people in this town specifically, when you look at our foreign exchange program and different, there's, I think I saw one map the other day that showed that like Vietnamese was like the next highest number of population in the state of Oklahoma or something like that. And so I think there is an opportunity to get a lot of people involved. And with council, it's not uncommon for committees to have a city council member be a representative at the committee that doesn't necessarily a voting member of it, but is there to be like, the council is listening or is an ear for the council in that committee to bring feedback to the council. So
Absolutely.
that's
and
another-
that's in tune with the mission is to collaborate aside one another. And that was something that was extensively discussed within our presentation meetings with HRC. We're wanting to supplement the already existing structure.
So,
I'm sorry.
yeah, I don't want us to get fixated on
know.
the number 21 as more, much more of just the concept and, the direction that we want to give staff, because now we're talking about creating, I don't know.
several.
But I am
several-
noting the feedback, so I do appreciate
Yeah,
that.
several committees, and what I was going to say is, in conversations that you and I have had, you are, have certainly gotten involved in what the process is and the kinds of steps that we need to take, and that you're comfortable continuing to serve as a resource with a lot of the research that you've already done. Because at this point, that document will be shared with staff, and you've heard some of the other discussion about, all the things that need to happen. We want to create all these other ones too. So I don't want to get fixated on the 21 so much as just your other thoughts about moving forward. So
I have a question about how are we prioritizing out of these new committees, what's coming first? What order are we? Because it sounded like it's not going to all be presented at once. It seems like once you kind of rewrite, you'll bring that, or are you doing it all at once?
I was picturing all at once.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Well, then that's even better.
Yeah.
So how
Yeah.
quickly you guys can get
Bam.
applications
Yeah.
and appointments will depend on how quickly the
Cynthia
new
had
committees really
Okay.
get.
yeah.
going.
I'm sorry, Ms.
No,
Allen.
that's fine. Thank you. And because I've got an appointment.
Yeah,
at
well, we
6.
have to stop in.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm
we're-
gonna just
we're-
make it brief.
Yeah.
So yes, and just the comments regarding the process and so forth. There are several tweaks that we recommended at the last meeting, and so many of those got put into this letter, which is great. I also hear a lot of collaboration. Just want to clarify, and also for the record, that I didn't get to collaborate with this, and so I think that that's a missed opportunity that we could work on going forward, especially as anything is developed in this realm, given that there are changes happening within the HRC, where, again, we discussed earlier, improving time allotments for a meeting from quarterly to maybe moving to monthly, expanding that opportunity, also changing the dynamics of giving more bandwidth for HRC to manage through issues, etc., by allowing them the opportunity with time, right? So removing the piece of those tedious things and allowing for more concrete changes like the conversion therapy, etc., things like that. So there's definite room as the opportunities for really developing just concrete work that we can move on with the elements we have now. But going forward, whatever direction you present, we're happy to move with and be able to put into action. I would move that we also do this with a very inclusive mindset, that even as we move towards these efforts, of course, of racial equity and so forth, that and this was discussed at the previous meeting, where we don't want to get into any legal type of standing by stating that only such members can be a part of the commission or committee, and so forth. So all of these things that I'm sure we'll work through together, but I just wanted to state that,
Yeah.
and I'm sorry that I've
No,
got
no,
to step.
that, I'm glad you did, and I'm glad you mentioned just, we have some legal issues that we definitely need to contend with, and Anthony Purinton is here, and he's actually part of the staff support, including you, Ms. Allen, to the Human Rights Commission. So if you don't mind, just kind of give a brief summary of some of the issues that came up the other night that you had to address, that we also need to consider and think about. So.
Yeah, sure. So I think the one thing too is I think the original recommendation wanted to be exclusively people of color. There were a lot of issues with that. I mean, you can't discriminate. We're a government agency. You can't discriminate on the basis of race. So I don't think that making that like a definitive, qualification is going to stand. And then there's also, I mean, even if you were able to do that, you'd really have to define what is a person of color. Like at what point? I mean, there's a lot of like if someone is, like if you look at ethnicity, it's not necessarily yes or no. It can be a quantum. Like for example, if you're Native American, like some tribes have a specific degree of Native American blood that you have to be a registered member of the tribe. Like, is that something that the city really wants to get into? I mean, that's going beyond the legal requirement anyway. So
How's Tulsa doing it then?
I'm glad you brought that up. We're already doing this in our normal commissions, like Greenbelt, right? Like what we're doing is you're making it an interest requirement. They have to be interested in this specific area. You have to have some sort of qualification to be on the commission. Tulsa does it. I know Ashley said they are like exclusively African American. That doesn't mean they make it a requirement. So it just so happens that the people who they draw from, those are people of color. So if you make it, for example, how Tulsa does it, and they have 12, advisory groups or advisory community groups that they pull from. So it's like they only pull their membership from certain community groups. And those groups may or may not have fully members that are fully people of color. So it's not based on like race, it's based on interest in racial equity and advocacy groups and stuff like that. So it's similar to what we've already been doing. It would just necessarily be geared towards interest in this particular topic.
And how you phrase it makes all
And
the
I would like
difference
to
in
add
the
into
world.
that very briefly. So we do know that with the GTAAC, with the Denver African Americans Commission, with the African American Commission in Virginia, they're doing something to promote maximal representation. And I'd like to add on as far as what would qualify someone as an ideal member of a commission like this, and that would be experience. And people of color, their internal experiences of being people of color lend them a very specialized expertise. I have 4 children. I have a special needs child. I'm a Black woman. I'm a single parent. I could go on and on and on. But my experiences inform my equity practice. So I would be really interested in getting further input from you, Anthony, and all of you on how we could articulate the requirements and making sure that people understand that life experience as a POC is legitimate expertise.
Right.
I'm a consultant with Resonator Institute, and I'm responsible for curating their POC programming. And one thing that we do is when a POC artist or creative wants to come and create something or set up an exhibit or so forth, we show them how to build a platform, and then they get on that platform themselves and they hold the microphone. We don't do it for them. So it's similar to me in this case. We need Black and brown people, non-white people, maximally represented, and that was like the closest thing to an exclusively POC membership. But again, that's just something that, the proposal is, a set of bones.
Yeah.
So looking forward to more input.
Well, go ahead, Councilmember Shirley.
No, I know that we're running
Yeah.
low on time, so I just want to say thank you for all of the work that you've done to this point. Thank you for the Human Rights Commission for taking this up and continuing to kind of push this forward. I'm really interested to see like your proposal kind of in its entirety as we work forward, because I know this isn't going away, and this is. And going away in the sense that, like, I want to see this continue forward, and us continue to kind of work on it. So that's really what I want to say. We don't want to kind of get into the details, but, like, I'm excited to see this go forward.
And I'm really excited that we're getting some, I'm in contact with 5 members from the commission and the chair who's on the council, city council in Tulsa. So I'm really excited to get their feedback and see if we can get it together in a room. Ideally virtually next time for our safety, but whether that be in person or not, so they can consult on all the obstacles, and Anthony's input there will help us with the legal stuff. So I'm feeling optimistic.
Thank you.
So I'm not sure about, structure going forward or the kinds of information that you can be pursuing, but we do not have the option, unless it's changed at the state level of meeting virtually, the Oversight Committee or any other city committee.
Right.
Sadly.
And I sympathize
but,
with that.
yeah.
But I mean,
So-
in person or not, I'll be here.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay. Councilmember Holman, did you have anything else?
No,
Okay.
just thank you for this.
So-
I had something short that might help to alleviate one of the points that Stephen was making earlier.
Okay.
When I was doing research to see other areas that had any kind of similar commissions, I have found that in at least 28 states, there are municipal commissions that are similar in nature. The biggest difference between what this is proposing versus what I was finding is most of the commissions are very specific. So Tulsa actually, they have 5 commissions. They've got the Human Rights Commission, the African American Affairs, Indian Affairs, Hispanic Affairs, and the Status of Women. So you'll see a ton of places will have commissions, but they're usually very specific to one group. And that's also part of the reason why we said up to 21 members, because this would be one commission for all of those types of groups. To kind of consolidate that, to have
Yeah.
one commission as opposed
Consolidate.
to 5 or something like that in Tulsa. So in comparison, hopefully, not only will we be looking at the population size, but also hopefully other, college towns that tend to have more diversity as well.
Absolutely.
Any other comments, questions? I just want to thank you for making the time for us today and for all the work that you put into this. And so I think generally the consensus is that we want to move this information forward as well, to, take a look from the staff standpoint of language, how it would work, what kind of committee, all those kinds of things that, like you said, we have a vision and we have a draft proposal that can be helpful, but we got to make it fit into what we actually can do. So I think that's where we stand with that, and I know you're willing to continue to add your body of research and you too from Human Rights Commission standpoint. So any other comments? All right, I want to thank you all. Thank you, city staff, Ms. Walker, Paul, for all of the work that we put into this. And I think we're really making progress. We're going to get there.
Closer to the finish line.
And,
I was gonna say, it's because Lauren and I are here.
yeah.
The
And thank you
tortoise
all for
won
your
the
input,
race.
and this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.